They walk into the room with a loud voice and a hollow mind, and somehow everyone listens. Meanwhile, the person in the back corner, the one who understands the situation better than anyone, says nothing, doesn't get heard, doesn't even try. Over time, you start to notice a disturbing pattern. The people making the biggest decisions in your company, your country, your society, are often the least qualified, the most impulsive, the loudest, the least self-aware. And the ones who should be leading, they're exhausted, disillusioned, silent. But this isn't just a coincidence. This is a system, a psychological trap. Carl Jung saw it long before it became obvious to the rest of us. He said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But in a world ruled by performance, narcissism, and noise, authentic people are pushed aside. Because true leaders, real thinkers, don't chase power. They chase truth. And truth doesn't win in a popularity contest. Let's go deeper. Think about your workplace. There's always that one person who talks more than they listen. They dominate meetings. They repeat buzzwords. And somehow they rise, while the calm, competent ones get ignored. It's not just frustrating. It's spiritual warfare. Jung believed society's structures often elevate the exact psychological types who are least fit to lead others. Why? Because ego craves attention. And modern systems reward attention, not wisdom. The people most obsessed with being seen are the ones who get seen the most. The algorithm doesn't filter for depth. It filters for volume. But here's the tragedy. The people who could actually lead us somewhere meaningful, they're too busy doing the real work, too humble to self-promote, too aware of their flaws to fake perfection. So the paradox unfolds. The more you know, the more cautious you become. The more experience you gain, the more uncertain you feel. And the more you care about doing things right, the less likely you are to take the stage and scream. Meanwhile, the foolish rush in, unburdened by self-doubt, powered by ego. And we cheer them on. Why? Because the world rewards certainty, not complexity. Charisma, not character. Confidence, not competence. It's not that bad people win because they're evil. They win because they know how to play the game of illusion. But deep down, you already know this. You've seen it in school, in politics, in relationships, in movements that start with promise and end in chaos. You've seen good people sidelined. You've seen wise voices drowned out. You've seen the rise of the wrong ones, again and again. So what if Carl Jung was right? What if the problem isn't just corruption, or luck, or the system? What if the reason the wrong people always lead is because the right people have stopped trying? Because they're tired of the noise, tired of the lies, tired of pretending. But here's the most dangerous part. When wisdom goes quiet, foolishness becomes the voice of the people. And that's how civilizations fall. So here's the big question. If you're one of the right ones, why are you still silent? And what would happen if you finally spoke? Carl Jung didn't just observe the world. He saw the invisible forces underneath it. And when it came to power, he made one thing terrifyingly clear. The people most attracted to leadership are often the ones least capable of handling it. Why? Because true leadership isn't about status. It's about responsibility. And responsibility requires a confrontation with the shadow, the dark, hidden parts of the self. But the average person chasing power? They don't want to look inward. They don't want to wrestle with their ego, their insecurity, their darkness. They want to dominate. Jung called this ego inflation. When a person identifies with a role, an image, a persona, and starts to believe they are more than human. And power? It feeds that delusion. Instead of leading from wisdom, they lead from archetype, the king, the warrior, the savior. But it's a hollow performance, a costume. The real self is buried. The shadow is denied. And what remains is a puppet controlled by unconscious forces. This is why the wrong people always lead, because they are the ones most comfortable ignoring their inner chaos. They have no interest in self-reflection, no interest in restraint. They charge ahead, weaponizing certainty, charisma, and control, while the wise hesitate, question, and withdraw. Jung saw this everywhere, from religion to politics to psychiatry itself. He once said, "Every man carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is." Now think about what happens when a person with an unacknowledged shadow steps into power. They don't govern. They project. Their fears become policies. Their wounds become wars. Their fantasies become doctrine. And everyone beneath them suffers the consequences. In Jungian terms, these leaders are possessed by the archetype. They believe they've become divine, untouchable, righteous, chosen. But they're just humans playing gods, children wearing crowns. This explains so much of what we see in the world. The leader who punishes dissent because it threatens his fragile ego. The boss who micromanages because deep down he fears he's not enough. The influencer who preaches authenticity while carefully constructing every fake moment. They don't see the lie because they've become the lie. But what about the people who should be leading? The ones who've done the inner work? The ones who've faced their own darkness? They hesitate because Jung knew. The more self-aware you are, the more reluctant you become to impose your will on others. You understand your own contradictions. You see how easily good intentions can turn cruel. You've watched yourself sabotage things you love. So instead of stepping forward, you step back. And the space you leave behind, it gets filled, not by better people, but by louder ones. This is the tragedy Jung warned about. Modern society doesn't just ignore the unconscious. It rewards those who suppress it. Because depth makes people uncomfortable. Because truth isn't profitable. Because power doesn't tolerate vulnerability. So what rises to the top? The persona, the fake self. The image of leadership without the soul of it. The appearance of strength without the wisdom to use it. The mask of confidence, hiding the emptiness inside. And we, the followers, fall for it, again and again, because it's easier to follow a loud lie than a quiet truth. Because we're conditioned to worship the stage, not the substance. But Jung's message wasn't just a diagnosis. It was a warning. He believed that every time we choose charisma over character, we surrender a piece of our collective soul. And eventually, the cost becomes unbearable. We lose trust. we lose hope. We lose ourselves. Because when the wrong people lead, the right people break. Unless something changes. Unless the silent ones speak. You don't notice it at first. It starts with a strange rule. A policy that doesn't make sense. A decision that feels off. But you let it go. Because they're in charge. Right? Then it happens again. Someone wise is fired. Someone corrupt is promoted. Someone dangerous is applauded. And slowly, the atmosphere shifts. You begin to feel like you're walking on eggshells. Your ideas shrink. Your spirit dulls. And eventually, you stop speaking up at all. This is how civilizations decay. Not through explosions, but through subtle erosion. When the wrong people lead, the right people stop believing. They disconnect. They numb themselves. They retreat into survival. And society becomes a theater of silence, run by performers, abandoned by thinkers. Carl Jung understood this on both a psychological and a cultural level. He saw how bad leadership doesn't just create external chaos, it infects the psyche. When foolish, unintegrated individuals rise to power, they impose their unresolved inner conflicts onto the world. They use policy as projection. They treat people as extensions of their egos. They punish truth because it threatens their illusion. And the consequences? They echo through history. Look at the 20th century. Charismatic but unhinged leaders like Hitler and Stalin rose to power. Not despite their psychological dysfunction, but because of it. They embodied the collective shadow. They told people what they wanted to hear. They weaponized certainty, simplicity, and fear. And millions followed them, not because the people were evil, but because they were exhausted, confused, and desperate for someone who sounded sure. This is what happens when the persona wins over the self. Jung warned that when a society disconnects from its soul, it becomes vulnerable to mass psychosis, when the irrational is normalized and truth becomes dangerous. And we're seeing it again. Look around. Leaders who treat empathy like weakness. Celebrities who peddle surface-level inspiration while living in private misery. Corporations led by people who've never known a single day of humility. It's not just about them. It's about us. Because the longer we reward the wrong traits, aggression, arrogance, attention-seeking, the more we reshape our entire world around dysfunction. Workplaces become arenas for performance, not collaboration. Relationships become games of control, not connection. Communities become echo chambers, not sanctuaries. And perhaps, worst of all, children grow up believing that loudness is leadership. They stop learning how to think. They start learning how to perform. And so the cycle repeats. The thoughtful become silent. The silent become invisible. The invisible are replaced. And one day, you wake up in a world that feels foreign, even hostile. A world where truth is ridiculed, where wisdom is ignored, where power sits in the hands of the insecure. But Jung didn't just diagnose the problem. He showed us the emotional cost. When you live under the rule of the unfit, you start to question your own sanity. You second-guess your instincts. You downplay your value. You become smaller just to survive. You start asking yourself, maybe I am the problem. Maybe I'm too sensitive. Maybe I'm just not cut out for this world. But the truth? You're not broken. You're just living in a system that punishes depth and rewards illusion. A system where the emotionally unhealed rise because they're willing to lie to themselves and to everyone else. And if you don't understand that, you'll internalize the failure. You'll carry shame that doesn't belong to you. You'll bury your voice. You'll shrink until your soul is unrecognizable. That is the real consequence. It's not just about bad leadership. It's about the death of inner truth. And Jung knew, when a society kills its truth-tellers, it doesn't survive. Because when there are no more mirrors, there are only masks. So ask yourself, how many voices have been silenced by stupidity parading as certainty? How many lives have been wasted because brilliance was mistaken for weakness? How many futures have we sacrificed at the altar of ego? Too many. And it keeps happening. Because the wrong people keep leading, while the right ones keep waiting. Waiting to be seen. Waiting for permission. Waiting for the noise to quiet down. But it never does. Because the noise is the system now. There's a moment when something inside you snaps. You're in a meeting, or a family gathering, or watching the news. And someone says something so blindly stupid, so confidently wrong, that your soul flinches. And yet, everyone nods, smiles, pretends it makes sense. And you realize you're not quiet because you're weak. You're quiet because you've been taught to survive in a world that punishes depth. But what if silence isn't strength anymore? What if silence is betrayal? Carl Jung didn't believe in blind rebellion. He believed in conscious individuation, the act of becoming your true self, even when the world wants you to wear a mask. And right now, the world is dying from too many masks. Too many personas pretending to be leaders. Too many people playing roles they don't understand. Too many systems designed to elevate appearance over substance. But here's what Jung would tell you now. Stop waiting for permission. You don't need a crown to lead. You don't need a title to speak. You don't need applause to know you're right. The system favors the wrong people because the right people gave it away. They opted out. They self-censored. They decided it wasn't worth the fight. But it is. Because every time you stay quiet to protect your peace, you strengthen the noise. Every time you dim your insight so others don't feel threatened, you feed their illusion. Every time you say, "It's not my place," someone more foolish steps up and makes it theirs. But here's the truth, Jung understood. Your presence is resistance. Your voice, when it's real, terrifies the persona. Your refusal to play their game breaks the game. So what does it mean to break free? It means no longer mistaking humility for invisibility. It means knowing the difference between inner peace and learned helplessness. It means reclaiming the power you gave away, not to dominate, but to illuminate. Because here's the paradox. Real leadership doesn't come from ego. It comes from integration. You lead not because you want to be seen, but because you've seen yourself fully. You've faced your shadow. You've torn down your mask. You've touched the parts of you that most people spend their lives running from. And now, you can stand still while the world spins. You can speak calmly while the fools scream. You can choose action not for status, but for meaning. That is power, and it can't be faked. But here's where it gets dangerous, because once you begin to speak, truly speak, the system will push back. People will mock your stillness. They'll question your depth. They'll call your humility weakness, your complexity confusion. Why? Because your clarity exposes their performance. Your depth forces them to confront their shallowness. Your truth threatens their fantasy. But don't let that stop you. Jung believed that individuation was a painful, lonely process because it requires the death of the old self, the social mask, the people-pleasing performer. But once you die to the illusion, you rise in truth. And when you rise, others feel it. They may not understand it, but they recognize something ancient in you, something they've forgotten, something they buried in themselves. And suddenly, you're not just leading. You're remembering. You're reminding. You become the mirror that others didn't know they needed. That's how the right people lead. Not with noise, but with presence. Not with domination, but with depth. Not with manipulation, but with meaning. And if enough of those people rise, quietly, steadily, without apology, the balance shifts. The system breaks. The noise fades. And wisdom returns. Because leadership isn't about being followed. It's about being true. The most dangerous lie you've ever believed is that your voice doesn't matter. That if you're not loud, you're not powerful. That if you're not aggressive, you're not a leader. That if you're not playing the game, you're not even in it. But Carl Jung knew something deeper, something terrifying, something sacred. Real power doesn't scream. It whispers from the soul. And the world is starving for that whisper. Because here's the truth no one wants to admit. We don't trust our leaders. We don't admire our heroes. We don't believe the noise. We scroll past their promises. We smile through their slogans. But deep down, we're tired. Tired of being sold. Tired of being led by fools. Tired of pretending the masks are real. And beneath that exhaustion is a quiet longing, a hunger for someone, anyone, to stand up and not just perform, but be real. Not perfect, not polished, not loud, just real. And maybe that someone was never supposed to be them. Maybe it was supposed to be you. The one who's been watching from the shadows. The one who thought too much, felt too deeply, stayed too quiet. The one who thought, I'm not meant for power. But what if that was the greatest trick the world ever played on you? What if your silence was never humility, but fear? What if the world was never broken because of evil, but because the right people never stood up? Because they were too careful, too kind, too patient. But patience doesn't stop the parade of fools. Kindness doesn't dethrone the narcissist. Silence doesn't fix the system. Your truth does. Because every time you speak from the place you've been hiding, you fracture the illusion. And enough fractures collapse the mask. That's how change begins. Not with revolutions, not with slogans, not with perfect plans. It begins when one person refuses to lie anymore. So here you are, still watching, still nodding, still feeling something rise in you that you can't quite name. That's not coincidence. That's your soul knocking, telling you, enough waiting, enough hiding, enough silence. You were never too soft for this world. This world was just too noisy to hear you. But now, you've heard yourself. And once you've heard that voice, you can't go back. So here's the final truth. Jung would want you to understand. The wrong people lead because the right ones obey. The wrong people rise because the right ones retreat. The wrong people stay because the right ones leave. Don't leave anymore. Stand. Speak. Lead. Not because you want power, but because you've seen what happens when power goes unchallenged. This isn't about changing the world overnight. It's about no longer letting the world change you. Because the moment you choose truth over comfort, depth over noise, and soul over mask, you don't just reclaim yourself. You become the person others were waiting for. And maybe, just maybe, they'll rise too. So now, tell us, truly, have you been hiding your voice all along? Drop a comment and finish this sentence. I stayed silent because... If this video felt like a mirror to your soul, then don't walk away quietly. Subscribe to Psychatic, where we dismantle the illusion and remind you who you really are. Like, share. And if you feel called to, support our truth with super thanks, because this time, the right voices deserve to rise.